The applicant was one of 9 children from Nazareth Lodge, Belfast, who were then subjected to IQ tests by Professor Seth, the head of the Department of Psychology at Queen's University in Belfast. Professor Seth reported to the Department of Immigration on his tests carried out in August 1956 on the 6th of September 1956. This report can be found at pages AUS 11494 and 11495. The final stage of the process then was his sailing from Southampton, aged just 6, on Christmas Eve 1956. It is of note that the application form sent to the Department of Immigration in December 1955 says first of all that he was in care and that the Secretary of State had given consent to the child's immigration. Although the manner in which this happened is not clear in every respect, it appears to have been the position that in many, if not all of the cases where children were sent from one of the 4 Sisters of Nazareth institutions in Northern Ireland, the Mother Superior initially nominated names to one of the Catholic organisations responsible for child migration, such as the Australian Catholic Immigration Committee. That at least would seem to be the position from a letter sent on behalf of the director of the ACIC to the then Mother Superior of Termanbacca in 1951, which we can see at AUS 5218, please. In this letter, he indicates that he already has a list of names on file and suggests the 4 names to the Mother Superior. He states that they require application forms, birth certificate, baptismal certificate, confirmation certificate if confirmed, case history, IQ report and school report. He states many of these documents we already have. He then sets out the papers which he holds for each of the children and asks whether or not the children are still available for emigration, together with any other names that might be put forward for inclusion in a later batch. He concludes, "We would point out that very careful selection is now taking place, and therefore if children are any way below average and do not come up to the required standard, they are being sent back." This emphasis on only selecting children who were in good health is clear and is confirmed by his next letter. As that letter was apparently wrongly addressed, a further letter was sent including a name of a 5th boy who was thought to be the brother of one of those mentioned in the earlier letters. If we look at AUS 5216 through to 5217. Again, it makes the point about the need for children to reach a certain standard, because the letter concludes, "When submitting further applications, Father Nicol asks you to bear in mind the fact that if these children are in any way below average, mentally or physically, they will be sent back." With regard to the issue of parental consent, there is much to consider. Father Cyril Stinson was the director of the Catholic Episcopal Migration and Welfare Association Incorporated of Western Australia. In 1952, he was the Australian representative in the United Kingdom of the Federal Catholic Immigration Committee. Both bodies were involved in bringing Catholics to Australia. An undated letter sent by Father Cyril Stinson contained a list of 16 boys who had been accepted for emigration and were due to sail on the 29th of January. That can be found at AUS 5208. This letter presumably therefore refers to the sailing which actually occurred on the 29th of January 1953. The travel arrangements are described, and it is suggested that they arrive in London no later than the night before the boat train to Southampton the next morning. The letter also refers to a list of names of children submitted by Termanbacca for a future sailing and includes the questions whether or not we have to get parents' consent. Finally, he says, "I understand SND1 was withdrawn because his grandmother refused consent." In December 1955, we find the Catholic Child Welfare Council writing to the Mother Superior Termanbacca in relation to the 11 boys whom he wished to emigrate to Australia. That's at AUS 5209. This letter refers to the necessity to have the parents' consent form signed in triplicate and duly witnessed. This matter is of special importance owing to a new ruling from Australia House. A further letter from the Secretary of the Catholic Child Welfare Council to the Mother Superior Termanbacca dated the 17th of January 1956, which is at AUS 5211, refers to the necessity to send a brief history of the child to Australia, giving the date and reason for the child coming into care, whether or not the parents had been in contact with the child, and a few details regarding the physical and educational history and religious practice of the child up to the present date. The letter also refers to the contact between the parent and the child, and the final sentence at AUS 5212, which is hard to decipher, reads, "Should the mother still be in contact with the child, then you should state that the mother, we think it's wishes the child to be emigrated for the future benefit of the child." I trust that is clear. The inquiry will wish to consider how much effort was put into obtaining parental consent, as many who have spoken to us claim that none was obtained from their parents. A curious feature of the details supplied to the inquiry by the Sisters of Nazareth is that 5 of the boys sent in 1947 came from Nazareth House in Sligo and went to Nazareth House in Derry. 3 of those boys went to Australia. 2 had been born in Northern Ireland, and the third, although he was born in Castleblaney, County Monaghan, may have been born of a mother who was a native of County Fermanagh. He was later admitted to Termanbacca, from whence he was sent to Australia. However, in his case, solicitors acting on his behalf alleged the consent form was signed by the Mother Superior of Nazareth House in Sligo. The inquiry may wish to consider the legal status of these children at the time of migration. That children were being sent from Northern Ireland was well publicised at the time. A picture in the Derry Journal of the 2nd of August 1947, which can be seen at AUS 8147, shows a group of boys from Termanbacca ready to leave for Australia. When they arrived in Australia, considerable publicity was given to their arrival, both recorded on film and in other ways. A number of witnesses who have already given evidence to the inquiry in Module 1 commented on the process of children being taken from Termanbacca to emigrate to Australia. Some confirmed that their parents were approached and refused their consent to their children being sent to Australia. HIA 121, who gave evidence on day 5, and an extract from his evidence can be found at AUS 8149, said that he learnt from his mother and father in 1965 that they took him and his brother off a list of boys who were due to go to Australia. However, it is unclear from his account whether his parents learnt about the proposed emigration by accident or were formally consulted. He said that he remembered the nuns talking about the boys going to Australia and a nun walking along a line with the doctor to select the boys. HIA 151 on day 10 said that he remembered a line of boys being selected for Australia when he was about 7. However, as the last group went in 1956 when he was aged 4, he is clearly mistaken about the dates, and his evidence is in the bundle at AUS 8150 to 8151. Another boy, HIA 235, who gave evidence on day 4, said that he learnt from his cousins that his mother wouldn't allow him to be taken to Australia. That's at AUS 8152 to 8153. HIA 146 believed that it was out of the question for him to be taken because he had parents, whereas the children who went were aged 14 or 15 and had no parents. That's on day 5, and it's at it's AUS 8158. Perhaps most significantly, SND 482, who gave evidence on day 32 and whose evidence can be found at AUS 8154 to 8157, said that no one was sent unless a family member agreed, and that he remembered a particular nun saying that no more children from Termanbacca were going to Australia. This is a striking remark, given that we know that no children from Termanbacca did go to Australia after the group of 5 who were sent on the 8th of May 1953, whereas 3 subsequent batches of children, or possibly 2 if you count the 2 sailings in February 1955 that were within days of each other as one sailing, were sent in subsequent years. I wish now to say something more about the official reports concerning child migration published in the 1950s. Chairman, I'm conscious of the time. I anticipate that I would take probably about another 15 minutes to conclude my opening remarks.
Well, if you're content to carry on, we
yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, John Moss, CBE, was a member of the Curtis Committee and also of the Kent County and he was also the Kent County Welfare Officer. When the Home Office learnt that he was due to make a private visit to Australia in 1951, it asked him to make some inquiries into conditions in those homes where children emigrating from the United Kingdom were received. His report, which was subsequently published in 1953, entitled Child Migration to Australia, and which can be found in the bundle at AUS 4392 to 4420, was described as an independent record of Mr. Moss's impressions and is not to be taken as expressing the views of the Home Office or any Australian authority. The report delivered by Moss was broadly favourable to the principle of child migration, although he did make comments about a number of individual homes, and in his conclusions he said, "I hope this report will give an impetus to the emigration of children from the United Kingdom to Australia, as I have no doubt that many children who are children's homes here would have much better prospects in Australia if they are carefully selected and are of suitable ages." That can be seen at AUS 4414. Of particular relevance to the work of this inquiry is that he formed the opinion that the Roman Catholic establishments for children in Australia compare very favourably with those in this country. As an interesting side note, the foundation book for the home run by the Sisters of Nazareth at Geraldton in Western Australia records Mr. Moss's visit on December the 18th, 1951. If we could briefly look at that, please. It's at AUS 5432. Just look at the top of that page. It says, on December 18th, we were visited by Mr. and Mrs. Moss from the British Migration Department, also Mr. Abbott, Child Welfare Department. Their object was to see how the migrants were being treated. The Reverend Cyril Stinson, Director of the Catholic Migration Perth, was also here and was a tremendous help to us in entertaining and talking to them. All were pleased with the visit and assured us the migrants looked very healthy, happy and well cared for. It is also significant that whilst Moss noted at pages AUS 4414 to 4415 that some 2,000 children had been emigrated under this scheme since the end of the World War, local authorities have taken very little interest in the scheme, either in relation to children in their own children's homes or children for whom they are contributing to voluntary homes such as Roman Catholic orphanages. Local authorities must naturally be satisfied that any action they take as to children in their care is in the interest of the children. There seems to be a feeling in some quarters that it is wrong to send a child for whom a local authority is responsible some 10 or 12,000 miles away. However, he concluded that if those responsible had the same opportunity as he and his wife had of inspecting these premises, I am sure they would have no hesitation in helping to fill the vacancies which now exist in approved establishments, and would adopt a general policy of sending a regular but small flow of suitable children. They would then not only be doing good to the children, but helping in a small way to increase the English-born population of Australia. Moss completed his report in January 1952, and it is clear from the Northern Ireland Government papers in the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland that a copy of this report was received by the Ministry of Home Affairs. And the title page of the report bears a number of handwritten references to Big Brother entries and those relating to Doringla in the report. That's at AUS 4393. The Empire Settlement Acts were due to expire in 1957, and as payments were made under the Acts to those voluntary societies concerned with child migration to Australia, the British government appointed a fact-finding mission to visit Australia. This was chaired by John Ross, CB, a former Under-Secretary of State at the Home Office, and he and his colleagues produced their report in August 1956. That report can be found at AUS 3557 to 3570. The Ross report was critical of the conditions in Australia in many of the institutions, 26 of which were visited by the committee. It was so critical of conditions in these homes in Australia that the Australian government would not agree to its publication until its own officials had visited the institutions. The Australian Senate report noted that the shortcomings were only detected at Duringley and Bundoon, and minor improvements were suggested. The Australian inquiry concluded, in view of this, it is felt that there is no justification for your government to take any action to cause even a temporary deferment of child migration to Australia. That can be found at AUS 2680 in the Senate report. In the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth Relations Office recorded that, as we feared, the Australian authorities focus only on material things like bathrooms and carpets and ignore what had been said about atmosphere and management. A UK Home Office official minuted that the Australian report confirms my view that Australian and UK thinking on childcare matters is poles apart. Again, that is seen in the Senate report at AUS 2680. The Ross report was extremely critical of the principle of child migration, and in particular about matters such as the unsatisfactory premises, the isolation of the homes, and that the children were being separated by gender, and also that siblings were being separated. And as he put it, not all the staff had sufficient knowledge of childcare methods. AUS 3562 to 3564. As I've said, in addition to the 5 institutions which he expressly criticised, he attached to his report a secret annex which was not published. Although we do not have a copy of the annex, we know of its existence from interdepartmental Home Office letters sent in June 1956, which can be seen at AUS 4206 to 4208. And I've said in that annex he was very critical of a number of other institutions which he had not publicly criticised because he hadn't been to all of them, and the information was not so strong in some instances to allow him to express public criticism. The Ross report was made available to the Northern Ireland Government, including its secret annex. We see this at documentation at AUS 4249 to 4252. And the copy in the Ministry of Home Affairs file carries a manuscript note that it was copied to Miss Forrest, Miss Wright and Miss Miller in February 1957. That hand note is at AUS 3557. At this time, the Northern Ireland Government anticipated a visit from Australia by a leading public figure there, and was somewhat embarrassed by the position it found itself in, as can be seen in a Home Affairs memo of 1958, which is found at AUS 4269 to 4270. In the event, the last children to be sent by the Sisters of Nazareth had already sailed on the 24th of December 1957. And no further children were sent from Northern Ireland, so far as the inquiry is aware, under migration schemes. As you've indicated, Mr. Chairman, the inquiry cannot deal with the way in which these children may have been treated by those responsible for the Australian institutions to which they were sent after they arrived. Nevertheless, as you have stated, that the inquiry's view is that it is necessary for it to consider what steps the Sisters of Nazareth themselves took to keep themselves informed about the progress of the children in Australia, and in particular whether they facilitated any efforts by relatives of the children to either establish contact or keep in contact with those children. It is unclear whether any such steps were taken. As the inquiry will hear, it is a common complaint by applicants that they received no letters from home, that letters were kept from them if they were sent, and that their parents in many instances either were unaware that their children had been sent to Australia or maintained subsequently that they had been deceived about that. These are all matters which the inquiry will no doubt wish to consider in the context of the acts or omissions of those who were responsible for these children in Northern Ireland. The inquiry may feel that the efforts of Tyrone County Council in trying to keep in touch with its child migrant demonstrates what could, and the inquiry may think should, have been done in this respect by everyone who sent a child who was in their care to be placed in the care of another institution in a foreign country, many thousands of miles away. The inquiry may feel that the following are questions it will have to address at the end of this module. 1. What was the reason for the participation in the Australian child migrant schemes by A, the Sisters of Nazareth, and B, the other institutions that sent child migrants to Australia? 2. What steps did A, the Sisters of Nazareth, and B, the other institutions, take to inform themselves beforehand of the conditions for the children in the institutions in Australia to which they were to be sent? 3. On what basis were the children selected or put forward by A, the Sisters of Nazareth, and B, the other institutions for participation in the Australian child migrant schemes? 4. A, were children selected on the basis, either in whole or in part, that their parents did not contribute financially towards their upkeep? B, were they selected on the basis of their physical health, taking into account the requirements of the Australian authorities and or the receiving institutions? 5. Were any attempts made by A, the Sisters of Nazareth, and B, by the other institutions, to explain the implications of the Australian child migrant scheme to the parents of the children selected or put forward by them for participation in the Australian child migrant schemes? 6. What attempts were made by A, the Sisters of Nazareth, and B, the other institutions, to obtain the consent of the parents of a child to be sent to Australia under the child migrant schemes? 7. What steps did A, the Sisters of Nazareth, and B, the other institutions, take to have children medically examined in Northern Ireland for their physical and mental suitability to be sent to Australia? Did A, the Sisters of Nazareth, or B, the other institutions, receive payment for each child? If so, from whom and how much? Once the children were sent to Australia as child migrants, 9. What steps did A, the Sisters of Nazareth, or B, the other institutions, take to keep themselves informed of the progress of the children in Australia? Were any written or oral reports requested or received? Were any inspections carried out of either of the children or the institutions after the children went to Australia by or on behalf of the Sisters of Nazareth or by the other institutions? What steps did A, the Sisters of Nazareth, and B, the other institutions, take to facilitate contact between parents and children and or siblings once the children had gone to Australia? Did the Sisters of Nazareth and the other institutions inform or consult the Northern Ireland government that it was sending children from Northern Ireland to Australia? 12. A, was the Northern Ireland government consulted by the relevant departments in London before any children from Northern Ireland were sent to Australia as child migrants? And B, if so, what was the attitude of the Northern Ireland government? 13. Was the Northern Ireland government informed by A, the Sisters of Nazareth, and B, by any other institution or organisation intending to send or having sent children from Northern Ireland as child migrants? If it was informed or consulted, what was the attitude of the Northern Ireland government? Did the Northern Ireland government take any steps to inform itself of the conditions for Northern Irish children sent to Australia as child migrants? If so, what were those steps? Chairman, panel members, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes my opening remarks for this, our second module of evidence, and seem an appropriate time to take a break.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Smith. We will adjourn now and we will sit again as close to 2:10 as we can manage. Thank you very much.